Back this week, and today we're going to talk about the sound of vintage instruments. So a lot of musicians feel that vintage musical instruments have a better sound than modern instruments do. Why is this? It certainly can't be because of production quality, because modern production quality is far superior to what they had in the 50s and 60s. Yet a lot of people swear by the sound of vintage musical instruments. And so I'm going to use as an example this snare drum here. So this is a Lyra snare drum. And this is a generic made in Japan snare drum from, I'm guessing, the late 60s, the mid to late 60s. Now this drum is in really good condition. It's held up well over time. It's been really well taken care of. It's kind of in the style of the Slingerland and Gretsch drums of the time. The badges are they're not exactly the beaver tail badges that you would have found in old Slingerlands, but they look similar. It's got stick saver hoops where the flange rounds to the inside. Now this would have been a really inexpensive drum. These kind of drums, these generic made in Japan drums, MIJ drums, there were a lot of different names on them, but they were all more than likely made in the same factories around the time. And really the only thing that changes is the name badge. So this one is a Lyra. Other names are Apollo, Lido, Stewart, Zimgar. Now, Apollo would have gone on to become Pearl drums, but a lot of generic names for these drums, where they would have completed the drum, just stuck on a different badge, and that would have been it. The thing that makes these drums inexpensive, even for the time, was the fact that they were made from a very, very inexpensive wood called Luan, or Philippine mahogany. So with Luan, or Philippine mahogany, the grain of the wood is running vertical, meaning it's running up and down. So if you look at the grain, it's a little hard to see, but if you look at the grain of the wood, it's running from top to bottom, rather than horizontally or from side to side. So it's an inexpensive wood. Running the grain from top to bottom is an inexpensive way to make the wood round. So a lot of these drums over time have become out of round. They become kind of oval. But a lot of them still have a really, really good sound. So this drum, despite the fact that it was inexpensive, even for the time, and made of low quality materials, has a really, really nice sound. I've recorded with it, I've played it many times. I just put new heads on it, it sounds fantastic. Why is that? The same holds true for other kinds of instruments like basses, guitars, cellos, violins. As they get older, a lot of people say the sound is nicer. It's more mellow, it's a sweeter sound. So not long ago I was reading an article by Rick Turner from Bass Player magazine. This particular article is from February of 1997. And he talks about that. He says, the magic about vintage instruments isn't simply that they don't build them like they used to. In fact, modern craftsmanship is generally equal to or better than what was going on in the 50s or 60s, which is true. He goes on to say, the most important thing that separates good instruments, good old instruments, from newer instruments is many years of being vibrated by string motion or the sound of vibration moving through an instrument like a drum. The constant shaking settles the wood fibers, causing certain frequencies to resonate more readily while making others vibrate less. So, as an instrument's played, the vibrations move through the wood. In the case of the drum, the vibrations move through the wood. Same thing with a guitar, a bass, a cello, a violin. And vibrations, like water, seek the route of least resistance. So as they go through the instrument, they widen certain parts of the wood, and they vibrate and shake certain parts of the wood, and that actually changes the structure of the wood. So Rick Turner, he talks about an interview he has with a guitarist named Jim Kweskin. And Jim Kweskin theorizes that if it were possible to have two truly identical new instruments played for 10 years by two different musicians, the guitars would take on the musical personalities of the separate players. That's really interesting too, because people play instruments differently. If I were to take a bass or a guitar and play it over time, there's certain ways that I play, there's certain notes that I go to, certain patterns that I go to that are sending vibrations and dynamics through the instrument. And that's actually changing the density, changing the wood itself on an organic level. If the same instrument were played by someone else, where they put their fingers, the sounds that they get, the notes that they play, would alter that instrument in a different way than something that I would have played. So I think this kind of touches at why a lot of people have a fondness for vintage musical instruments. Over time, the wood in the instruments actually changes. It gets altered by the vibration that goes through it, and it produces a much more mellow, articulate sound than new instruments that haven't gone through this kind of aging process. So if you do have a vintage musical instrument and you compare it to something that's more modern, I'd be interested in hearing what your conclusions are. Do you think that vintage musical instruments have a better sound? Or do you like the sound of modern instruments? Add a comment and let me know. And that's all I got. Thanks.